Thank you, and it's really wonderful to be here in Trivandrum. I've been to Kerala many, many times, but somehow I've never been to Trivandrum, and I'm just loving the city. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you to Mathrubhumi for inviting me. Now, my topic today is women in power politics. I'm not really sure what one says about women in power politics, but I thought that I would change the format a little bit. Normally, you speak for 30 minutes and then you open it up for questions. I thought I'll just speak for a little bit, maybe 5-10 minutes, and then we can open up to questions and take it from there. What do you think? Is that better? Yeah? Instead of me just saying what I think is what you want to hear, maybe we can just discuss what each of you want to discuss. So, I guess the topic, normally I don't like accepting these topics which are very women-oriented because, I think the very fact that women get siloed into a woman author, a woman politician, a woman doctor, that itself is something that we need to get away from. Because I would like to be just a politician, or just a leader, or just a doctor. Men are never asked, what does it feel like to be a male doctor? What does it feel like to be a male engineer? So part of the problem is also continuing with this stereotype. But again, it's a difficult one to break because when you're asked and you say you're not going to go, then that doesn't help also. So I think one of the things is that we need to move away from the fact that we are defined, our gender defines us, because women are the only gender whose gender is defining their profession. For men, it's never like that. And I think we'll have reached equality when we actually don't use male or female before what we do. We let what we do defines us. I was looking at the women, the UN Women in Parliament, the Women in Leadership report, which just came out in September 2022. And, we can look at it in the corporate world, we can look at it in medicine, but if I'm going to just look at it in terms of parliamentary democracies and I'm going to look at it in terms of politics, the report is actually quite worrying. And it says that the world over, there's only 26% representation of women in parliament. 26% is the global average. Now, that has been lifted up, obviously, by some countries. There are about 5 countries that have got to more than 50%. There are about, I think, 28, 30 countries that have got to 40%. India, very strange, I wouldn't say very strangely, but very sadly, even though we've had women as heads of state and women as heads of government, India today is only at an abysmal 12% in parliament. So today in the world, there's only 28 women who are leading countries. There's 13 heads of state and 15 heads of government. So India, for example, has a head of state and the president, but our prime minister is male. There are countries which have a female prime minister and a male president. So 13 heads, so there's only 28 countries in the world that have women in things of power. Now, but once you go down, and if we are they had a very interesting chart, the UN study, and it says if you are to extrapolate how much time it took to reach this from the levels of 1995, it would take another 130 years to reach gender equality, as defined by 50%. So that's a really long time. I'm not sure we need to wait that long. But when you look at lower levels of representation, so you look at local governments and you look at the 136 countries, the average is much higher, it's 34%. Even in India, because we've had the amendment, the constitutional amendment and the Panchayati Raj coming in, we've got a 33% reservation for women in the local bodies across all the states. So most of our states, in fact in Bengal now, in most places, it's higher than 40% in local bodies. Now all the countries that have reached 40 or 50% have done it. 2/3 of those countries have a women reservation bill. Now, this is a very long-standing argument the world over, including in India, is that do you need a law to teach you to do the right thing, to teach you for equality, or should civilized countries and civilized people just normally progress towards that without a stick, without beating you on the stick with it? But again, sadly, we found that only countries that have brought in legislation and said that we need to legislate, we need to have 50% representation in parliament are the countries that have done it. Otherwise, you have a party like mine. There are only two political parties in India, the Trinamool Congress and the Biju Janata Dal, that without the women's reservation bill have already got more than 33% in parliament in women. We have, I think, 35%, and the Biju Janata Dal has also 35-36% women. But otherwise, when you look at the other parties, in fact, even ones with the brute majority, when it comes to women representation in parliament, they're exceedingly low. So yes, unfortunately, like sometimes you need a law to tell a man not to beat his wife, you also need a law to tell people that this is our right and we demand it, and it's high time that we got it. And this is something, the Women's Reservation Bill, as you know, has been this 20-year saga in Parliament. It has come up, it has lapsed, and even parties with brute majorities in Parliament have never really brought in the Women's Reservation Bill. There have been ordinances on everything under the sun, but nobody's done an ordinance on the Women's Reservation Bill. So that's what it looks like now. But having said that, I do think that there are two things that women in power, I would use the term power politics, I would just use politics, because politics is leadership, is having some kind of control, having some kind of access to power, if not direct power. So if in women in politics, I think there are two or three things that are strangely contradictory. If you look at the corporate world and you look at the glass ceiling, I came from investment banking, and in investment banking, when people come out of college and they're recruited by the big banks, in a particular analyst class, you will find 50% men and 50% women. After 2 years, when analysts get promoted to associate, that number becomes 70-30. When you go to vice president, it becomes 90-10. And when you go to the top, which is about managing director, it's almost 99 or 98-2. That's how the glass ceiling in the corporate world is. Now, in politics, it's not as easy. It's not that you have, the barrier to entry is much higher. Especially in a country like India, the barrier to entry, if you are from a political family, there is no barrier. But if you are a lateral entrant, that is, if you're someone like me, who's come in without a background in politics or without a legacy in politics, and you're coming in from a professional background, then the barriers to entry are almost impossible. They are almost impossible. Because you need a secure source of savings to see you through, unless you want to go the 5% on every tender way, which is not necessarily the right way to go. And so I think, but if you are born into a political family, then it's almost as if the daughter or the wife or the daughter-in-law is automatically considered the heir. So in Indian politics, the fact that you're a woman in a dynastic line does not exclude you. Very often you will see when a politician retires or is not given the ticket, his wife or his daughter-in-law, so then the gender doesn't go against you. But if you're not in dynastic politics, then to get into politics, the bar is higher for women than for men. So that's another thing that I've found. Again, this matters from state to state. So I think I come from the east, from Bengal. So if you see Assam, Bengal, Orissa, you see parts of the northeast, you see, and the other, if you also see Kerala. I remember Manishankar Iyer telling me a long time ago when I had entered politics, he says, in states where they regard women as ma, you're okay. In states where they call you behen, you're in trouble. And as kind of funny as it may be, I think there's a certain amount of truth to it. In Bengal, at least in my journey, I have really come from the grassroots up. I've spent most of my time in rural areas. I represent a rural area. I live in a rural area. And I have found at least my gender is, for lack of a better word, an advantage. It's an advantage. I don't think that the stereotyping of role-specific stereotypes are that much in Bengal as in Kerala. I mean, it's not so much what you can do, it's who's going to stop you, right? I think Kerala and Bengal are quite similar that way. It's who's going to stop you. So I think in Bengal, the thought, as in Kerala, is that if you have a daughter or a son, more often than not, the access to education, the access to opportunities is probably more equal than in most other states. So even when they view women leaders, if they will view me, they don't necessarily think, they may not, whoever doesn't like me may not like me of what I do and what I stand for, but I don't think that they will bar me entry on account of being a woman. In fact, it is much easier for us in rural politics because we can enter places men can't necessarily go. So for example, if I'm canvassing or campaigning or doing development work in a village, nothing stops me from going inside a house where there's only women or men. And for men or men leaders or even grassroots workers, it is not so easy for them to have access into the household and to the kitchen. I think that's important. I also think it's the kind of role models that you grow up with. That's also very important. One of the great things about having 33% women reservation in the lower panchayat levels, people say that this is done more harm than good because you go to many places and you ask, where is the pradhan? Where is the panchayat pradhan? And you find that she's sitting at home cooking and her husband is running the panchayat. You do see this. I have had situations where somebody has sat in the car with me all day and I have thought he's the pradhan. And then it's only towards the end of the evening I have learned that that is not the pradhan, but that is the husband of the pradhan. So when we have meetings with the block development officer, development meetings, I was one of the few people, I still am one of the few people that say, whoever is elected has to come. The husband or the father-in-law cannot come, right? So this, what we call panchayat patis, or sort of a pradhan by proxy is not going to work. But a lot of people don't do it. But the good news is, even if you have it running by proxy, even if you have situations where it might take another 10 or 15 years for this system to go, and for women who are actually elected to be sitting in the chair, the idea that there is a female pradhan means that the children, at least in the village, grow up thinking, my mother's the pradhan. We have a female pradhan. So somewhere or not in your subconscious, you are used to women in positions of leadership. And over time, over generations, that actually gets us 2 steps ahead. So no matter what the downside of the panchayati gender reservation in the panchayat is, and there are many downsides to it, I do think, like with caste-based reservation, that there are some very large takeaways from it that over time help us move forward. So the other thing that I wanted to say is, this is something which is true in politics, but I also think it's true in everything else, is if you're a woman and you are tough and you know your mind and you have clarity of vision, you're a bitch, you're called aggressive, you're called bossy, but those very same qualities in a man are qualities to be lauded. Oh, you know, he knows his mind, he's a leader, he's standing straight, he knows what he wants. So this is something that is not just true in politics, it is true in banking as well. I had a female boss. My first boss on Wall Street was a lady who actually was an alumnus of my college. And I remember being so happy when I got her as a boss, thinking she'll be very nice, and she wasn't. She was really quite nasty. So one day, I think a month or 2 after we started, you know, we went out for a drink and we were talking, and she said, how's it going? And I wasn't looking very happy, and she said, what's wrong? And I said, well, you know, I sometimes feel you don't like me, you're very tough. And she said, don't you understand, in Wall Street, we can't afford to be nice. The women just, in order to compete, have got to be nasty, because nastiness is equated with being tough and being a successful banker. So these were the stereotypes that I think at least women in the 80s and 90s had to deal with. I think now, finally, the freedom of choice, which is the freedom to be soft, the freedom to be a woman leader and still wear high-heeled shoes, the freedom to be a woman leader and not make excuses about wearing red nail polish, that is also my freedom, right? The freedom to be, if I choose to be at home and look after my children, is also my freedom. If I choose to keep a nanny and go out and work, is also my freedom. So I think this idea of a holistic idea of freedom as choices, as active choices that women are allowed to make, rather than choices that are thrust upon them by either circumstances or family or the patriarchy, is something that obviously in the last 10 years we have seen huge leaps in. And also in politics, you do see support systems around politics and around women leaders getting better and better and better. Having said that, in Parliament, if we are women, do I feel the need sometimes that if you're a woman, you feel the need to stick together, no, irrespective of party lines? Yes, sometimes I do, irrespective of party lines. I feel the need to stick together. But if it's something that is completely outrageous, then I do think that it's time that we say, okay, I may be a woman, but I do have a brain. And I'm not going to be, just because I'm a woman, I'm not going to stick together with the treasury benches because this is not something I agree with. So I think in some things, politics is no different from medicine or engineering or law or anything like that, where these stereotypes make it difficult for everyone. In terms of juggling home and career, I think in politics it's pretty much the same with anything else. Every woman, whether she is a woman leader or a politician or a doctor or an engineer, faces pretty much the same choices between home and hearth and between going out. So again, there I don't think the differences are very stark.